If hell had a waiting room, it would probably look a lot like the back alley I found myself in that night, reeking of gasoline, echoing with broken promises, and holding nothing but the sound of my brother's labored breathing against my chest. I had never thought of myself as reckless, but there I was, 22 years old, running through the shadows of Brooklyn with a boy who had lost too much and a future I hadn't even begun to write. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that the choice I made in that alley would chain me to a man whose world was darker and more intoxicating than anything I had ever imagined. His name was Adrian Blackwell. He was the kind of man you didn't look in the eyes unless you wanted to sell your soul. The night began like a crime novel no one would publish. My brother, Michael, had gotten himself into something ugly debts with men who didn't forgive. He was just 19. Naive enough to think promises meant anything on the streets. When I found him, bruised and bloody, I didn't ask questions. I just pulled him up, my arm around his trembling shoulders, and ran. But you don't run from men like Adrian Blackwell. When the headlights cut across the alley, I froze. A sleek black car slid to a stop, doors opening in perfect, almost rehearsed synchronization. And then he stepped out, not with the rough edges of the thugs who chased us, but with the cool, terrifying grace of someone who owned every inch of ground beneath him. Ethan Hayes! He said my name like he had written it in a ledger years ago, waiting for this exact moment. His voice was calm, rich, and far too intimate for someone I had never met. You think you can take what's mine and just disappear into the night? I held my brother tighter. He's not yours. My voice shook, but I meant every word. Adrian's smile didn't reach his eyes. Everything has a price. Your brother couldn't pay his. That makes him mine. Unless. He stepped closer, the sharp scent of expensive cologne cutting through the filth of the alley. You're willing to make a deal. That was the moment the ground shifted beneath my feet. The instant my life divided into before Adrian and after Adrian. The deal wasn't spoken in full sentences. It was in the way Adrian's gaze lingered on me instead of Michael. The way his hand brushed against mine when he took my phone, typing in a number I would later regret calling. He didn't need to explain the terms. I understood. My brother's freedom in exchange for my silence. My obedience. My life wrapped in the velvet chains of a man who had built his empire in shadows. And I said yes. New York looked different when you were owned. Every street corner became a cage. Every skyscraper a reminder of who sat at the top looking down. Adrian didn't touch me that night, didn't even raise his voice. He didn't need to. He had already won. The next morning, I woke up in a penthouse I had never seen before. My brother gone sent somewhere safe, Adrian had said, with a tone that dared me to question it. The place was luxurious, with glass walls that framed the city like a painting, but it felt more like a prison than any cell could. Adrian's world was full of contradictions. On one hand, he was ruthless. I watched him tear a man apart in a boardroom with nothing but a smile and a few well-placed words. On the other, he was meticulous, almost gentle when he set a glass of water on the table in front of me after I hadn't spoken for hours. You're quieter than I expected, he said one evening, pouring himself a drink. His tie was undone, his sleeves rolled up, as if the mask of perfection he wore for the world had slipped, just a little. Do you expect me to thank you? I shot back. My voice cracked, betraying the storm inside me. Adrian tilted his head. For saving your brother? No. But you could thank me for choosing you instead. The words hung between us, sharp and heavy. I wanted to hate him for them, wanted to spit in his face and demand my life back. But hate wasn't simple. Not when his eyes softened for a split second when they met mine. Not when the weight of his presence made my chest tighten in ways I didn't want to admit. Nights blurred into days. Adrian didn't keep me locked away. But he didn't let me go either. He brought me to his world-exclusive clubs, hidden behind unmarked doors. Dinners with men who looked at me like I was something fragile Adrian had stolen from the world just to prove he could. I should have felt disgusted. Instead, I felt seen. And that terrified me. Because no one had ever looked at me the way Adrian did, not with lust, though it was there, simmering beneath the surface, but with recognition. Like he knew the parts of me I kept hidden, the parts that were too soft, too afraid, too desperate to be wanted. Why me? I asked him once, standing on that rooftop with the city sprawled out beneath us. Adrian lit a cigarette, the glow painting his face in shades of fire and shadow. Because you remind me of what I lost. He never told me what that was, but I saw it in the way his hand shook when he thought I wasn't looking, in the way his smile cracked at the edges when the world wasn't watching. And damn me, but I wanted to know him, the man behind the empire, the man who kept me in his grasp but also, in some twisted way, kept me alive. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had risked everything to save my brother from being owned. And in the end, I had chained myself instead. But what I didn't expect, what I couldn't stop, was falling for the man who held the key. That was only the beginning. What followed was betrayal, secrets unraveling like threads pulled too tight, and the slow, terrifying realization that love can bloom even in the darkest places. That sometimes the man you fear most becomes the one you can't live without. And in the silence between us, in the stolen moments when Adrian's hand brushed mine and lingered too long, I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was as bound to me as I was to him. Adrian didn't kiss me the first week or the second. That almost made it worse. Instead, he unraveled me slowly, one glance, one word, one unspoken boundary at a time. He had this way of leaning in when I spoke, not interrupting, just waiting, like he was dissecting my every hesitation. And I hated that it made me feel noticed. No one had ever been patient enough to notice me before. But patience with Adrian Blackwell was never free. The first time I saw him break someone, it was over something so trivial I almost laughed. A man, one of his associates, had slipped in delivering money on time. Just a few hours late. Adrian never raised his voice. He never touched him. He just stared across the table until the man's throat worked, dry, desperate. Then Adrian leaned back and said, "If you're late again, you'll wish you hadn't been born." The man shook so hard his glass shattered against the floor. Adrian didn't flinch. He just looked at me, as though daring me to flinch instead. I didn't. That night, when we were back at the penthouse, he poured me a glass of whiskey I didn't ask for and slid it across the counter. "You're learning," he said. I shoved the glass away. "Learning what?" "How to be as cold as you." He chuckled, low and dangerous. "No, Ethan. How to survive." Survival. That was what every day with Adrian became. My brother called once a week, supervised. Always. His voice shook with relief when he heard mine, and I forced myself to sound steady, strong. I told him I was fine, that everything was okay. But the truth was messier. Because somewhere between the threats and the silence, Adrian started showing me fragments of himself. The man behind the glass walls. He took me to a quiet bar once, tucked away in an abandoned street. No bodyguards, no pretense. Just him and me in a corner booth, the dim light catching the sharp lines of his face. "This was my father's place," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "He built it, ran it for 10 years before he was killed." I blinked. Killed? Adrian swirled his drink. "This city eats the weak." He trusted the wrong people. I was 17. The way he said it detached, like it was just another fact, made my chest ache. I wanted to reach for him, to say something, but I didn't. I didn't know how. Instead, I whispered, "I'm sorry." For the first time, he looked at me without his armor. So am I. I didn't know what to make of the nights that followed. Some were suffocating with silence, Adrian working late into the night, his phone lighting up with names I'd never know. Other nights, he stayed close, too close, his hand brushing mine as we passed in the kitchen. His breath warm against my neck when he leaned over to grab a file. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded myself he was my captor, not my confidant. But my body betrayed me. My chest tightened when he was near. My pulse raced at the sound of his laugh, he rarely gave anyone else. One evening, the tension snapped. We were standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittering beneath us like it was built for gods. I was exhausted of pretending, of hating, of wanting. Adrian stepped behind me, his reflection merging with mine in the glass. "You hate me," he murmured. I swallowed hard. "I should." His hand hovered near my shoulder, not touching, just there, heavy with intention. Then why do you look at me like that? Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Because I don't understand you, I whispered. Adrian's breath brushed my ear. Maybe I don't want to be understood. And then finally touched me. Just his hand, resting against my shoulder, steady, grounding. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it felt like fire. The next weeks blurred with contradictions. He pushed me into his world, forcing me to see its ugliness. Meetings in dim warehouses, men with guns strapped to their belts, the raw danger that hummed beneath every deal. But then he shielded me from it. The moment anyone's gaze lingered on me too long, Adrian's voice cut like a knife. The moment someone's words grew sharp, Adrian's hand found the small of my back, a silent warning. He's mine. I told myself it was possession, control, another chain. But late at night, when I lay awake in the room he gave men ever locked, never barred, I couldn't stop wondering if it was something else. The breaking point came on a storm-soaked night. I woke to shouting, not in my head this time, but real, tearing through the penthouse walls. Adrian's voice, raw with fury. I crept toward the sound and found him in the living room, phone clutched tight in his hand. "You don't touch him," he roared into the receiver. His chest rose and fell, his eyes blazing like wildfire. "You want to come after me, fine. But if you lay a finger on him, I'll burn you to the ground." I froze. He didn't mean Michael. He meant me. When he noticed me, his expression shifted, fury collapsing into something unguarded, almost fragile. He dropped the phone, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice hoarse. I swallowed hard. "You were talking about me." Adrian's jaw tightened. His hand lifted, hesitated, then cupped my face as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "They'll use you against me. They'll use anything I care about." The word care cracked something in me. "I'm not yours," I whispered, though my body betrayed me, leaning into his touch. His thumb brushed against my cheek, softer than I thought he was capable of. "Aren't you?" And God help me, I didn't have an answer. The storm outside raged into morning, but inside, silence stretched between us. I should have pulled away, demanded freedom, screamed that I didn't belong in his world. Instead, I let him hold me, and that was the moment I realized the truth I had been running from. I wasn't just bound by Adrian's power, his control, his empire of shadows. I was bound by something far more dangerous. I was falling in love with him. The first time I faced Adrian in public, truly in his world, I realized just how small I was. The restaurant was the kind of place you didn't walk into unless you were born into money or had clawed your way into power. Velvet booths, gold chandeliers, and the kind of silence that cost more than my entire childhood. Adrian didn't even blink as we walked in, men in suits stepping aside, women whispering behind manicured hands. I felt the weight of every stare. Adrian placed a hand at the small of my back, not pushing, not holding, just there. A signal. He's with me. But the looks that followed weren't kind. Some were curious, others sharp, and a few so filled with disgust I wanted to shrink into the floor. 2 men at the bar sneered when their eyes met mine, one muttering something I didn't catch, but I understood all the same. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not next to him. Not in this world. When we sat, Adrian leaned across the table, his voice low but firm. "Ignore them." I forced a laugh. "Easy for you to say. They don't look at you like you're a mistake." His eyes darkened, not with anger at me, but at them. "If anyone makes you feel like that again, you tell me." I swallowed, unsure whether the fury in his voice terrified me or comforted me. The waiter appeared, bowing slightly. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwell. Your usual." Adrian nodded. His gaze flicked back to me. "And for him, I can order for myself." I cut in before I could stop myself. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't stand the thought of being another possession, another object handled on his behalf. Adrian studied me for a long moment, then leaned back, lips curling faintly. "Of course." The waiter blinked, uncertain, before handing me the menu. My hands shook as I flipped it open, scanning prices that made my chest tighten. Adrian watched me the entire time, his eyes unreadable. I ordered the cheapest thing I could find. The waiter left, and silence settled between us, heavy as lead. Finally, Adrian said, "You're not a mistake, Ethan." The words hung there almost fragile. He didn't say them like reassurance. He said them like truth. But not everyone shared his conviction. By the time dessert came, two men I'd noticed earlier approached our table. One was tall, silver-haired, the kind of man whose shoes probably cost more than my rent. The other was younger, smirking like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. "Blackwell?" the older one said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Didn't know you'd started bringing strays to dinner." Adrian didn't move. His hand rested on his wine glass, calm, deliberate. "Leave," the younger man laughed. "What's the matter? Afraid we'll break your toy?" His gaze slid to me, sharp and cruel. "Or is this your way of making a statement? The king of the underground, sitting here with a I didn't hear the rest." Because in a blur, Adrian was standing, his chair shoved back, his fist gripping the younger man's collar. The entire restaurant froze. "You don't speak his name. You don't look at him. You don't even breathe in his direction." Adrian's voice was ice, low and lethal. "Do you understand?" The man choked out a nod, eyes wide with terror. Adrian released him, smoothing his suit like nothing had happened. "Get out," he said simply. The two men stumbled away, the silence in the room heavier than before. I could feel every eye on us, every judgment. I wanted to disappear, but when I looked at Adrian, at the fury still burning in his eyes, I felt something else entirely. Protected, wanted, and that scared me more than the hatred in the room. That night, back at the penthouse, I couldn't hold it in. "You can't keep doing that," I said, pacing the room. "You can't just threaten people like that because of me." Adrian sat on the edge of the couch, unbothered, watching me like a storm he had no intention of stopping. "Would you rather I let them humiliate you? I don't need your protection." My voice cracked. "I need my freedom." The words hung in the air, jagged and raw. Adrian's jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked hurt. "You think I'm keeping you here because I want to?" His voice was low, trembling at the edges. "You don't understand, Ethan. If I let you go, they'll tear you apart. They'll use you against me. You're safer here." "Safe?" I laughed bitterly. "I'm not safe, Adrian. I'm trapped." The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, he stood, crossing the room until he was inches from me. His hand lifted, hesitated, then dropped to his side. "Maybe I'm trapped too," he whispered. And just like that, the fight drained out of me. Because for the first time, I saw the weight he carried, the chains he wore, invisible but suffocating all the same. We weren't so different, after all. The weeks that followed blurred with secrets peeling away like old paint. I learned Adrian had enemies far beyond the city rivals who wanted his empire, politicians who wanted his silence, men who saw me as leverage. Every time the phone rang in the middle of the night, my stomach clenched, waiting for the world to collapse. And then there was his past. One evening, I found him in his office, staring at an old photograph. A boy 16, maybe 17, with Adrian's eyes and a smile I had never seen on him. "Who is he?" I asked quietly. Adrian didn't look up. "My brother." My breath caught. "You never told me you had a brother." "Because he's gone." His voice was sharp, final. But I couldn't let it go. "Gone how?" Adrian's hands tightened around the frame. "Because I wasn't strong enough to save him." The crack in his voice broke something in me. I stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. "You can't carry that forever," I whispered. His eyes met mine, dark and desperate. "And what about you, Ethan? You think you can carry your brother's mistakes without breaking?" The words cut deep, because he was right. We were two men bound by chains we didn't choose. And somehow, those chains had tangled us together. The night he kissed me wasn't planned. It wasn't in the middle of a storm, or after a fight, or during one of those long silences where words felt dangerous. It was quiet, simple. We were standing on the balcony, the city spread out below us, the hum of traffic like a lullaby. I was cold, shivering in my thin shirt, and Adrian, without a word, draped his jacket over my shoulders. Our eyes met, and before I could think, before I could remind myself of every reason it was wrong, his lips were on mine, soft, careful, as if he was afraid I'd break. I should have pulled away. I should have screamed, but I didn't, because in that moment, with his arms around me and the city forgotten beneath us, I wasn't trapped. I wasn't afraid. I was his. The kiss changed everything. Not just between us, but within me. I had told myself for weeks that what I felt wasn't real, that it was desperation, confusion, the twisted intimacy of captivity. But the moment his lips touched mine, every lie I had told myself crumbled. Because what I felt wasn't weakness. It was freedom, the kind I'd never dared to imagine. But freedom came with a price. It didn't take long for the outside world to notice. Rumors spread through the underground, first whispers that Adrian Blackwell had found his weakness in the form of a boy who shouldn't have mattered. Then it spilled into the city, feeding the mouths of reporters, politicians, and enemies who had been waiting years for a way to strike him down. One morning, the newspaper headlines screamed with scandal. Blackwell's secret, the boy he hides in his penthouse. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the words, my stomach twisting into knots. My brother's name was in the article too, dragged into the fire, his mistakes printed for the world to consume. Adrian walked in, silent, the paper already folded under his arm. His face was stone, unreadable. I'm sorry, I whispered. He set the paper down, leaned against the counter, and finally met my eyes. Don't be. They were going to come for me anyway. You just gave them a clearer target. That's supposed to make me feel better? I snapped, fear mixing with guilt. His gaze softened. It's supposed to remind you that you're not the one who should feel ashamed. They are. But it was too late. The damage was done. The attacks came fast, financial hits to his businesses, raids on his clubs, men shadowing us when we walked the streets. For the first time, I saw Adrian shaken, not by the loss of power, but by the thought of losing me. They'll try to take you, he told me one night, his hands gripping my shoulders, his eyes burning into mine. Promise me you won't run. Promise me you'll stay where I can find you. I nodded, though fear clawed at my chest. But promises are fragile things. The night they came for me, it wasn't with guns or threats. It was with words sharp and calculated. A man approached me outside the penthouse, just as I was returning from a walk. He was clean-cut, well-dressed, the kind of man who looked like he belonged on Wall Street, not in back alleys. You don't belong with him, he said, his voice low. You're young. You still have a chance at a normal life. Walk away now, and we'll make sure your brother stays safe. The words sank like knives. I thought of Michael, of his voice trembling every time he called, of the debt he would never escape. And for a split second, I wondered if they were right. But then I thought of Adrian, off his hand steady on mine when the world judged me, of the grief in his eyes when he spoke of his lost brother, of the kiss that had stolen the air from my lungs and given it back as something new. I'm not walking away, I said, my voice shaking but certain. The man's smile vanished. Then you've chosen your cage. But I didn't feel caged. Not anymore. The final storm hit harder than anything before. Adrian's enemies struck all at once, burning his businesses, tearing apart his empire piece by piece. The city turned its back on him, and the underground smelled blood in the water. One night, as flames licked the sky from one of his warehouses, Adrian pulled me into the car, his hands trembling for the first time. We have to leave, he said, his voice raw. There's nothing left here. I shook my head. You can't run. If you do, they win. His eyes met mine, torn between rage and despair. If I stay, they'll take you from me. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against his. Then we fight. Together. For the first time, he didn't argue. He just held me like I was the only thing tethering him to the earth. The fight wasn't glamorous. It wasn't cinematic. It was brutal, messy, filled with sleepless nights and bruised knuckles. But slowly, piece by piece, Adrian rebuilt not his empire, but something stronger. Something real. He didn't hide me anymore. When the world looked at us with disgust, Adrian didn't flinch. He walked beside me, hand in mine, as if daring anyone to tear us apart. And when whispers followed us, I learned not to shrink. Because standing next to him, I wasn't a mistake. I was his choice. Months later, the city had settled. Adrian's power was different now, leaner, quieter, no longer built on fear alone, but on alliances forged through respect. His enemies faded into silence, their teeth dulled. And on a quiet morning, as sunlight spilled into the penthouse, Adrian sat beside me on the balcony, our coffee cups steaming between us. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought I'd have this." "This?" I asked, leaning into his shoulder. "Peace. You." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. "I spent my life building walls, and then you walked straight through them." I smiled, my chest warm. Maybe because I was never afraid of what was behind them. He kissed my temple, gentle, unhurried. "You should have been." "Maybe," I whispered. "But if I had been, I would have missed this." And for the first time, I realized the chains that had bound us weren't chains at all. They were threads, fragile, unbreakable, weaving us into something neither of us had ever believed we deserved. Love. Not the easy kind. Not the safe kind. But the kind worth every scar, every battle, every whisper of hate. The kind that felt like freedom. When my brother finally walked through the door one afternoon, healthy, safe, his eyes no longer shadowed by fear, I knew the story had come full circle. I had risked everything to save him, and in the process I had saved myself too. And standing there, Adrian's arm around me, Michael smiling for the first time in months, I understood the truth. I hadn't been trapped in Adrian's world. I had chosen it, chosen him, and he had chosen me, not out of power, not out of control, but out of love. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.